In the southernmost corner of the world, nestled among glinting glaciers and windswept ridges of white, there lived a small penguin named Larry. Unlike his brethren, Larry wasn't terribly interested in fish or ice slides or huddling together to survive the long winter nights. He preferred something else entirely: stories. Not the kind told over blubber stew, but the kinds written in strange books left behind by explorers who had long vanished into snowstorms. Larry had a tiny cave near the rookery where he kept a private collection: scraps of maps, bits of compasses, and a half-torn journal with scribbles in red ink. He could barely read human writing, but he understood one thing very clearly: adventure was real, and it waited just beyond the next ridge. One morning, the wind arrived angry and early, spitting snow sideways and rattling the ice shelves like dice in a cup. Larry shuffled out of his nook anyway, his little scarf whipping behind him. That scarf had been part of a sock once, salvaged from a wrecked crate that washed ashore a year ago. It smelled like cinnamon and pine needles. He made his way to Old Snap's ledge. Old Snap was the elder of the colony and had earned his name by biting any flipper that came too close without asking permission. Despite his gruffness, Larry liked him. Snap had once walked farther than any penguin dared, claiming he saw a mountain that breathed steam and glowed like the sun. No one believed him, of course. Except Larry. "Morning, Snap," Larry said, settling beside the old bird. "You look like a fish with frostbite," Snap grumbled without turning. Larry smiled. "I found something." At that, Snap turned, his beady eyes narrowing. "Found something or imagined something?" Larry pulled a frozen corner of parchment from under his scarf. It was buried beneath the snowbank near the old buoy. "Looks like a map." Snap snatched it with surprising speed. His eyes scanned the strange, angular lines, and his feathers bristled. "I've seen this shape," Snap muttered. Larry leaned in. "Where?" "The far drifts. Beyond the blue cliffs. There's a valley shaped like that." Snap jabbed a claw at the drawing. "But no penguin goes that way anymore. Not since the ground cracked and swallowed half the slope." Larry's heart pounded. He looked up at the black clouds tumbling across the sky. "Then that's where I'm going." Snap grunted. "You'll need more than flippers and fluff." As it turned out, Larry wouldn't be going alone. By midday, the colony buzzed with news of the map. Most penguins dismissed it as another one of Larry's odd fixations, but a few stopped to listen, curious in spite of themselves. Chief among them was Greta, a lean, no-nonsense penguin who patrolled the edges of the rookery and took pride in knowing every crevice and crack within 10 miles. She'd saved more than one chick from falling into a snow sink. "You'll freeze before you find anything," Greta said, appearing beside Larry as he packed sardines into a leaf-wrapped bundle. "Maybe. But if I don't go, I'll always wonder." Greta tilted her head. "You really believe there's something out there?" "I do," Larry said. "I think someone left this map for a reason. And if I'm right, it leads to something no penguin has ever seen." Greta studied him for a long moment. "You're soft, Larry. But you've got a spine under those feathers." "I'll come." Larry blinked. "You will. Someone's got to keep you from falling off a cliff." And so it was settled. By dusk, they had enough supplies for a 5-day journey, which Greta insisted meant 3 days there and 2 back, no more. They set off under moonlight, their little shadows stretching behind them like questions. On the second day, the landscape began to change. The snow grew crustier, sharper, and the wind carried a sound like distant humming. Larry kept glancing at the map, occasionally flipping it upside down as if the lines might suddenly make more sense that way. Greta walked in silence, occasionally sniffing the air. They passed strange things, a rusted weather balloon anchored to an ice wall, a set of paw prints frozen mid-stride, and once, a bundle of wool, likely from some long-lost explorer's jacket, fluttering eerily atop a boulder. But nothing prepared them for the valley. On the evening of the third day, just as the last of their dried sardines was shared between them, they crested the ridge and looked down. There, carved into the ice, was a spiral-shaped depression, a frozen whirlpool nearly the size of their entire colony. At its center was something dark. "Is that a ship?" Larry whispered. It was. Half buried in the ice was a wooden vessel, its bow cracked and pointing skyward like a skeletal finger. The masts were gone, snapped clean, and one side of the hull looked caved in. Yet the ship had an unmistakable shape, one Larry had seen sketched in the torn journal back home. Greta's voice was low. "No one's been here in generations." Larry didn't answer. He was already moving, scrambling down the slope with reckless speed. Greta hissed at him to slow down, but Larry wasn't listening. The wind had shifted. There was a warmth below, not in temperature, but in sensation. As if something long forgotten had stirred. Inside the ship, it was like stepping into a dream. Ice crusted the floor and hung from the ceiling in thin needles. But the bones of the vessel remained intact. On a table made from crates, a lantern sat untouched. Beneath it, a sealed compartment. Larry pried it open with a flipper and gasped. Inside was another map, much older than his, and beneath it, something impossible. A feather. It shimmered with a color no penguin could name, changing hue with every tilt of the lantern light. It was warm to the touch. Not warm like body heat, warm like memory. As if it remembered being alive. Greta stepped beside him. "That's no bird feather. I don't think it's from any bird we've ever known." As they stared, a crack echoed outside, sharp and sudden. The ice beneath the ship groaned. Then, from above, a shadow moved across the spiral valley. Someone else was here. And they had just found the feather of fate. The creak of shifting ice held a language of its own, ancient, low, and ominous. Larry and Greta crouched beside the open compartment, their eyes darting toward the hull's jagged entryway. The shadow that passed outside hadn't been the wind. It had form. Movement. Intention. Greta nudged Larry with her flipper. "We need to hide." "But the feather, now." Larry snatched the glowing feather and the brittle map, shoving them beneath his scarf. Greta led him silently across the rotting floorboards, avoiding every spot that groaned beneath their feet. They slipped behind a row of splintered barrels in what remained of the ship's galley, just as the first sound of claws, sharp and deliberate, tapped across the ice-coated deck. A silhouette appeared in the ship's doorway, outlined by the dim silver of the spiral valley's moonlight. It wasn't a penguin. Too tall. Too slender. The shape ducked its head as it entered, cloaked in tattered cloth the color of soot. From beneath the hood, two glimmering orange eyes scanned the cabin. Larry held his breath. The feather, tucked close to his chest, throbbed with a pulse that wasn't his own. The figure moved with unsettling grace, stepping around broken planks and snow-caked crates without a sound. It stopped at the open compartment. A long, gloved hand reached down. Empty. The figure hissed, low and dry, like steam escaping a frozen pipe. It spoke, though not to them. Too late. The feather has chosen. Larry turned to Greta, barely moving his beak. What does that mean? No idea, she whispered back, but I don't like it. The figure straightened, turning its head slightly, as if sniffing the air. Greta's feathers bristled. Run, she whispered. And they did. They burst from the shadows, feet skidding on frost as they barreled through the narrow ship corridor. Behind them, the figure let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, but not far from it, high and metallic, like tearing ice and echoing bells. Larry scrambled up the broken stairway and back into the open valley, the freezing air like knives in his face. Greta was right behind him. They didn't stop running until they reached a shallow cave half buried near the edge of the spiral, panting and shaking. Larry collapsed into the snow. What was that? He managed. Greta peeked out from behind a boulder. Not from here. Not like us. Do you think it was guarding the ship? No, she said slowly, I think it was waiting for someone to find it. Larry pulled out the feather. Now that it was away from the ship, it shimmered more brightly, the color shifting from pale indigo to deep emerald in soft, breathing waves. Greta didn't look away from it. It knew. Knew what? That you'd come. That someone would. Maybe it doesn't want to be found by just anyone. Larry turned the feather over in his flippers. There were markings etched into the spine. Not penguin language. Not human either. Just curved, elegant runes that seemed to rearrange themselves when stared at too long. What if it's a key? Larry asked. Greta frowned. To what? To whatever the first map leads to. I think this was just a step. Greta lowered herself beside him. So you think this isn't the destination? No. I think it's the beginning. The wind howled outside, carrying the strange call of the creature, or being, that had walked through the ship. Larry curled the feather close and tucked it away. We can't go back to the colony. Greta didn't argue. She watched the horizon. Then where? Larry pulled out the old map. A tiny square was marked on the lower corner. A symbol shaped like the feather. Beneath it, a set of dots that looked almost like a trail. He remembered what Snap had said, the far drifts. He pointed at the marking. This is where we go next. You realize we've barely survived this much. I know. But we've come too far to stop. Greta exhaled sharply but didn't disagree. That was all the confirmation Larry needed. They traveled at night, resting in crevices during the day to avoid the blistering wind. The spiral valley disappeared behind them, but the tension did not. Larry often looked over his shoulder, wondering if the figure would follow. If it had a name. If it was truly alone. 3 days later, they reached the cliffs. Towering pillars of deep blue ice that loomed like frozen gods. No path existed between them. Just jagged chasms and slippery ledges. Greta studied them from a distance. If we slip once, it's over. Larry's voice was calm. Then we don't slip. They picked their way across, Greta moving with practiced caution and Larry with reckless hope. At the midpoint of a narrow ledge, they stopped. Something glittered on the far side of a nearby outcrop. Another piece of parchment, pinned beneath a frozen stone. Greta retrieved it, unfurled it slowly. More runes. And a single word they both understood. Chosen. Just then, the ice beneath Larry cracked. He let out a cry as one foot punched through the ledge. Greta lunged forward, gripping his scarf, pulling with all her strength. The ledge began to collapse. Let go. Larry shouted. Not a chance. She yanked him upward as the ice broke free, shattering and tumbling into the depths. They collapsed onto the safe side, panting again, exhausted and alive. Larry looked at the note in her flipper. Who's choosing? Greta looked out over the peaks. We'll find out. But far below them, something stirred in the darkness. Something with claws and eyes of fire. It had been waiting a very long time for the feather to leave the spiral valley. And now, it knew exactly who had taken it. The sun barely rose this far into the far drifts. Instead, the sky hung in a perpetual haze of cold gray, the light diffused like old candle wax behind a sheet of ice. Greta and Larry stood at the edge of a ridge that overlooked what the map called the windless zone, a vast basin where nothing stirred. No snowflakes drifted. No wind howled. Even the air itself seemed to hesitate. Larry took a careful step forward and immediately felt the difference. It wasn't just quiet. It was still. His breath no longer puffed in the air, as if even the cold refused to announce itself here. Greta scanned the horizon. I don't trust this place. It's too quiet, Larry agreed. Like everything's holding its breath. The feather, tucked inside Larry's scarf, had gone inert. Its glow had dimmed since the moment they reached the ridge, and now it felt like a dead thing, no shimmer, no warmth. He pulled it out, cradling it in his flippers. It doesn't like this place either, he said. Good, Greta muttered. We're all in agreement then. Despite their instincts, the trail on the map, the trail of dots and loops and strange runes, led straight through the basin. There was no avoiding it. To their right, sheer ice cliffs blocked any detour. To the left, bottomless ravines cracked open like hungry mouths. As they stepped into the basin, the change was instant. The silence became heavier, pressing against their feathers and tightening around their chests. Their footsteps didn't crunch. They didn't echo. It felt like walking through a dream made of snow and fog. Greta stopped. Do you see that? Larry followed her gaze. In the middle of the basin, half sunken in the frost, stood a towering stone monolith. It jutted from the ice at a crooked angle, etched from top to bottom in the same spiraling runes found on the feather. Around its base were dozens of small objects, bones, mostly, arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate placement. But they weren't just animal bones. Some were too long. Some were too narrow. Some belonged to things neither of them could name. I don't like this, Greta said. This looks like a place meant to stay forgotten. But Larry was already walking toward it. The monolith loomed higher with every step, casting a shadow in a world where light barely existed. When they reached its base, Larry knelt beside the bones, inspecting them with gentle care. These were offerings. Greta stepped closer, hesitant. You sure? I've seen this shape before. This arrangement. In the journal pages from the wrecked ship. Larry pulled out the aged map and laid it flat on the ice. The pattern of bones around the monolith matched the symbols on the edge of the parchment. He looked up. This is a marker. For what? He pointed to a seam in the monolith's base. It wasn't natural. A panel, long since sealed shut by time and frost. Greta narrowed her eyes. This thing opens. Larry nodded. With the feather. Greta backed up a step. Larry, I have to try. He pulled the feather from his scarf. It had gone completely dull now, just a normal plume in appearance. But as he pressed it to the panel, something changed. A soft vibration traveled through the ground. The ice around the monolith cracked with sharp, clean lines. Then, with a deep sigh like an ancient breath, the seam split open and revealed a spiral staircase descending into the ground. No sound. No light. Just the quiet invitation of darkness. Larry turned to Greta. "You don't have to come." She shoved past him. "Don't be an idiot. I'm not letting you walk into some cursed ice tomb by yourself." They descended together. The air grew warmer as they went deeper. The stairs curved in perfect geometry, descending farther than should have been possible. Larry lost count of the steps after 200. The walls changed too. From ice, to stone, to some smooth, gray-black material that hummed faintly when touched. At last, they reached the bottom. They stood in a circular chamber carved from obsidian-like stone. Strange etchings ran across the walls, pulsing faintly with soft blue light. At the chamber's center floated a suspended orb, encased in glass, but pulsing like a heart. Inside the orb, a swirling cloud of feathers and light danced in slow, deliberate motion. Larry stared, transfixed. "This is it." Greta walked around the orb. "What is it?" Before Larry could answer, the room shifted. Not physically, but mentally. A pressure settled into their thoughts like fog seeping through cracks. A voice, not in words, but in meaning, spoke directly into them. "The feather has returned. The trial begins." Greta backed away. "No. No, I don't do voices in my head." The orb began to glow. The air vibrated. One was chosen. One must see. One must remember. A beam of light erupted from the orb, enveloping Larry in warmth and a searing flood of memory. He saw not with his eyes, but with his mind, 1,000 flashes of another world. Towers that floated above oceans of cloud. Creatures with wings of glass. A great bird, larger than a glacier, laying a single feather onto a frozen sea before vanishing into the sky. Then silence. When the light faded, Larry collapsed. Greta rushed to him, shaking his shoulders. "Hey! Hey! Stay with me." He blinked slowly. "I saw it. I saw everything." "What did you see?" "The feather, it came from something ancient. A guardian. A watcher. It left behind pieces of itself to remind the world who it was. Where it had been. And the map, it's a trail. To gather those pieces. Each one, unlocks something." Greta stood in stunned silence. "So this was a test." Larry nodded. "And we passed." The orb dimmed. The voice receded. Behind them, another doorway opened. Not stone. Not ice. A tunnel of light. But deep in the windless zone, far above, the cloaked figure that had pursued them from the wrecked ship now stood at the edge of the monolith. Its orange eyes burned brighter than ever. And this time, it was not alone. The light in the tunnel didn't shine. It floated. Thick and slow, like fog made of memory, pooling around Larry and Greta as they stepped through the threshold. Their shadows dissolved behind them, swallowed by the luminous walls. The tunnel was silent, oppressively so, but this silence no longer felt empty. It felt aware. Larry walked first, the feather held loosely in one flipper. Its glow had returned, faint but steady, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Greta followed just behind, eyes scanning every surface. "I don't like tunnels," she muttered. Larry gave a small nod. "Me either. But I think this one was built to be found." "By who?" "Penguins don't build tunnels like this." "No. But the ones who left the feather might have." The tunnel curved gently, with no seams, corners, or doors. Just a long, glowing path that bent downward at a slow, deliberate angle. After what felt like hours, or maybe just minutes, they reached the end. A circular archway opened into a cavern, though this space was unlike anything they'd seen above. Here, the walls were smooth crystal, humming faintly as they approached. In the center stood a pedestal carved from dark stone. Resting atop it was an object, not another feather, but a lens-like ring, encased in a nest of gleaming metal strands. It looked fragile. And alive. As Larry stepped closer, the room brightened. The ring lifted into the air and began to spin slowly, emitting a soft tone like the echo of a bell underwater. Then, the crystal walls lit up, projecting flickering images across the surfaces. Larry and Greta stood frozen. A scene unfolded on the walls, vast glacial plains, not unlike their home, but dotted with towers and strange machines. Birds, enormous and winged, flying alongside floating ships. Creatures of every shape and size sharing the ice without fear. Then, the images changed. Darkness swept in. One by one, the towers fell. The flying ships vanished into storms. A final image lingered, the great bird again, this time plunging into the clouds, scattering radiant feathers across the sea. The light dimmed. The ring floated back to its pedestal. Greta broke the silence. Is this the past? Larry turned to her. I think it's something worse. Worse than the past. I think it's a warning. The room pulsed again. This time, a soft voice. Not a pressure in the mind like before, but actual sound, spoke from somewhere above. Second mark verified. 2 remain. Greta stiffened. Second mark. Larry held up the feather. The runes etched into its spine had shifted. One now glowed a soft blue. Another had begun to flicker. He looked at the pedestal. That ring. I think it's one of the marks. He stepped forward and touched it. There was a sudden pull. Not physical, but through the feather. The glow surged, and the ring dissolved into a ripple of energy that sank into Larry's chest. He stumbled backward, gasping. Greta rushed to steady him. Larry, I'm fine, he managed. I think it bonded to the feather. Or maybe, to me. Greta frowned. That doesn't sound fine. From behind them, the tunnel pulsed red. A low vibration spread through the floor. The warm light began to fade. For the first time, the tunnel felt hostile. Greta looked toward the archway. Something's coming. Larry didn't argue. He grabbed the feather and the map, and together they bolted back the way they came. As they ran, the tunnel walls flickered with images again, not of history, but of eyes. Watching. Closing in. They reached the monolith chamber just as a sharp crack echoed from above. The entrance to the spiral staircase exploded outward in a cascade of splinters and snow. A figure dropped down. Not the cloaked one. This one was shorter, hunched, with a long snout and hollow, flickering eyes that clicked as it scanned the room. Greta grabbed Larry and ducked behind a stone pillar. There's more than one. Larry's breath came in short bursts. That's not just a tracker. That thing smells us. The creature tilted its head. Its limbs twitched. Then, with an awful shriek, it lunged toward their hiding spot. Greta shoved Larry away just in time. The creature's claws scraped the pillar, carving 3 deep gouges into the stone. It turned toward them, faster than anything its shape should have allowed. Larry ran. They raced up the spiral steps, the creature bounding behind them with clicking feet and feral snarls. The tunnel was collapsing. Ice rained from above. Cracks split across the stairs. Larry stumbled. Greta grabbed him again. "Come on. Move." They burst from the monolith's base and into the open air of the windless zone. Only now, the wind had returned. It screamed through the basin, kicking up flurries and stinging frost. Behind them, the monolith groaned and then collapsed, sinking into the ice as if pulled from below. The creature didn't follow. Not because it couldn't, but because something else stood behind them. The cloaked figure. Tall. Silent. Motionless. Larry raised the feather. The figure didn't move, but its voice, clear, cold, and patient, spoke without lips. 2 marks gathered. The wait begins. Larry took a step back. What does that mean? You were chosen to remember. But memories come with a price. The wind howled. The 3rd mark lies in the place without sky. If you reach it, your answers will come. Before Larry could speak again, the figure vanished. Gone. Like fog retreating before the sun. The windless zone grew quiet once more. Greta turned slowly. Place without sky. Larry looked at the map. A new dot had appeared. South. Farther than any penguin had ever traveled. He looked at her, eyes sharp now with certainty. We have to go. She stared at the horizon, then back at him. All right, she said. But next time we run into a creature with knives for hands, you distract it. They left the windless zone in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because words felt too small for what they'd just witnessed. Larry held the feather close as they trudged southward through jagged terrain, past ancient shelves of black ice and creaking plateaus that groaned like they remembered being mountains. The cold changed too. It wasn't harsher, but it was emptier. The wind blew without direction. The snow came and went, falling upward one moment and sideways the next. Time slipped around them in strange ways. What felt like an hour passed as a day. What should have taken a night's walk lasted a blink. By the 3rd day, the sun disappeared completely. The world above was gone. Greta was the first to say it. I think we've entered the place without sky. She wasn't wrong. The map showed nothing above this point, no stars, no moon, no markings. Just a blank slate beyond the 3rd dot, as though whoever charted it had given up or feared going farther. Larry held up the feather. 2 of the rune marks now glowed. The 3rd, dull and gray, pulsed slowly, faint and impatient. They stood on the edge of a deep canyon. The walls were black ice laced with veins of glowing silver. A narrow bridge of packed snow stretched across. On the far side, a small stone altar, no larger than a nest, surrounded by 4 sharp pillars that jutted from the earth like teeth. Larry looked at Greta. This is it. You first, she said. If the ground explodes or whispers your name again, I'm not taking the blame. Larry crossed the bridge carefully. The snow was strangely warm beneath his feet, like it remembered the sun. As he approached the altar, the feather pulsed brighter. Greta followed slowly behind. Let's get this over with. When Larry stepped onto the platform, the 3rd rune on the feather flared to life. The altar cracked open, not with sound, but with light. A beam shot skyward, or would have, had there been a sky to pierce. Instead, the beam bent and twisted, forming a ring above their heads that shimmered like water. A voice rang out, not the same as the one in the tunnel. This one was older. Rougher. The memory must be carried. The bearer must see. Larry grimaced. Another vision. But this was not like before. The light from the ring shot downward, swallowing both Larry and Greta. Their bodies locked in place. Their eyes rolled back. They didn't fall, but they left. In their minds, they were flying. Above oceans with no bottom. Over forests of crystal trees. Through cities made of glass and air. They saw the great bird again, majestic and terrible, carrying an orb of pure light across the sky. They watched as something followed it. A black shape, formless and hungry, creeping just behind the light, always near but never seen fully. The bird scattered feathers across the continents, each one a seed of memory, of defense, of warning. Then came the forgetting. Cities crumbled. Creatures vanished. The ice closed in. And the feathers waited. Larry awoke on the altar, gasping. Greta groaned beside him. Never again. I'm serious. Larry sat up. I think I know what it wants now. The big bird thing. It was protecting something. A power. A place. I think it knew it couldn't stop what was coming, so it left pieces of itself behind for others to follow. If enough are gathered, maybe it can be awakened again. Greta shook her head. I'm starting to think we're not finding a treasure, Larry. We're walking into a war. Larry didn't disagree. But something else had changed too. The feather now hovered slightly above his flipper, vibrating with a soft hum. It was fully awakened, 3 marks glowing, the 4th flickering now with anticipation. A final dot had appeared on the map. Far beyond any ice shelf. Beyond the known maps. Beyond even the place without sky. Greta peered at the glowing symbol. It's not even on this world, is it? Larry's voice was quiet. I don't think so. Then, a crack sounded behind them. They turned to see the bridge crumble, sinking into the canyon. The path back, gone. And from the mist on the other side, 2 shadows emerged. The cloaked figure stood tall, watching, saying nothing. Beside it walked the creature from the monolith, a hunchback thing of clicking limbs and empty sockets. But it wasn't alone anymore. Behind them came more shapes. Some limping. Some crawling. Some gliding just above the snow. Greta's flippers tensed. So much for rest. The figure raised a hand. The air shimmered. The 4th is not to be taken. It must be earned. Larry took a step back. You're not here to stop us. The figure tilted its head. No. We are here to see if you survive. A rift opened in the air behind them, rippling like a sheet of water. Greta stared into it. What is that? Larry smiled faintly. I think that's our next step. The figure spoke again, softer now. Beyond this door lies the place where memory lives. If you fail, the world forgets forever. The wind began to spin. The snow peeled upward. And Larry the penguin, bearer of the feather of fate, took one final look at the creatures gathering at the edge of the altar, and stepped into the rift. The world on the other side of the rift did not welcome them gently. Larry and Greta landed hard on smooth, slate-colored ground that resonated with a strange hum beneath their feet. The rift closed behind them with a sound like a sigh, and the silence that followed was not quiet. It was listening. Larry sat up, blinking against a bright, ambient light. There was no sun. No sky. Just a low, glowing ceiling made of rippling clouds that shimmered like oil on water. The air was thick with stillness. The kind of stillness that held its breath not out of peace, but anticipation. Greta groaned beside him. Well, this is awful. They were in a city. But not the kind carved by flippers or hands. The structures that surrounded them were enormous. Monoliths of glass and ivory, spiraling in impossible shapes that defied gravity. Some floated above the streets, anchored only by beams of golden light. Others pulsed gently, as if alive. There were no doors. No windows. Just endless corridors that curved into themselves like the inside of a seashell. Larry looked around, wide-eyed. This isn't the future. Greta raised an eyebrow. What? It's the past. The realization came to him all at once. This is what the world was before the forgetting. Greta stood slowly, scanning the empty streets. Then where is everyone? They walked in silence, the feather glowing steadily now, brighter than it ever had before. As they passed beneath archways and between strange towers, something moved above them, fleeting shadows that drifted through the air like leaves in water. They weren't creatures. Not really. More like echoes, shaped like memories. Half-seen forms of birds, whales, foxes, and other things with wings or eyes or teeth. They didn't interact. They didn't seem aware. They're not real, Greta murmured. They're memories, Larry said. Trapped here. Eventually, they reached a plaza at the center of the city. There stood a tree, not one made of wood and bark, but of silver. Its branches reached high into the clouded ceiling, each leaf a pane of flickering light. Beneath it sat a circle of stone, smooth and polished, with a shallow indentation at the center. Greta pointed. That looks like a feather-sized problem. Larry nodded. I think this is it. The final mark. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and placed the feather into the indentation. The effect was immediate. The plaza shook, not violently, but with the weight of something waking up. The leaves on the tree glowed. The shadows above paused. Then the light gathered. A spiral beam shot upward from the tree, splitting through the ceiling of clouds. The city responded like an orchestra stirring from slumber, structures shifting, harmonizing, vibrating with a low and beautiful hum. And then the sky opened. For the first time since entering this world, they saw it, a dark blue expanse filled with stars unlike any they'd seen before. They twisted. They moved. They watched. A voice boomed, not from the sky, not from the city, but from the feather itself. For have been gathered. Memory returns. The world may remember, if the bearer proves worthy. Greta stiffened. Proves worthy how? A doorway opened in the air, just ahead of the silver tree. From it, a staircase descended, not down, but inward, like diving into the surface of a lake. Larry turned to her. I have to go alone. Greta's eyes narrowed. Says who? The feather, he said gently. It stopped glowing when we crossed. It's quiet now. She looked away. You really think this is the end? I think it's the beginning of the end. Greta nodded slowly. If anything weird happens, I'm giving the giant memory tree a flipper slap. Larry smiled, then stepped into the doorway. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world changed again. He floated. There was no floor. No body. Just awareness. All around him, visions danced, his colony, his rookery, the day he found the torn journal. Snap's bitter voice. Greta's dry sarcasm. The ship in the ice. The monolith. The orb. Every moment layered atop the last, swirling in a spiral of memory. Then came the others. Not images of his past, but echoes of lives he had never lived, penguins long gone, explorers lost to snow, creatures who had touched the feather across centuries. They each stood before something larger than themselves. They each chose. A voice asked, not in words, but in presence, will you carry what they could not? Larry didn't hesitate. Yes. Light split across the void, brighter than anything his eyes had ever endured. He felt the feather disintegrate, not into ash, but into him. The runes, the glow, the warmth, it all sank into his bones. He fell. Then landed, breathless, back in the plaza. Greta rushed to him. What happened? Larry stood, slowly, eyes glowing faintly with the same hue the feather once held. It's part of me now. Greta took a step back. You okay? I think. I remember everything. All of it. The city trembled again. But this time, it wasn't waking up. It was saying goodbye. The silver tree began to fold inward, its branches curling protectively around the stone circle. The stars in the sky blinked out, one by one. The ground beneath their feet shifted. Greta looked up. We're being pulled back. And they were. The rift opened once more, unbidden, silent. They stepped through it together. Back into a world of snow. Back into a wind that still howled. But everything had changed. And far away, beyond the place where the last mark had burned into stone, the cloaked figure watched. It bowed its head. Then vanished. The sky above the rookery was no longer the same. For as long as any penguin could remember, the clouds had moved in one direction, churned endlessly from east to west in a slow, predictable rhythm that matched the tides. But the day Larry and Greta stepped back through the rift, the clouds halted. Then reversed. The shift was subtle, just enough to be noticed by the oldest among them. Old Snap stood on his usual ledge, watching the sky with narrowed eyes. Something prickled in the back of his mind, a memory that hadn't existed the day before. A memory of a feather. A map. A ship beneath the ice. He blinked and frowned. Strange. When Larry and Greta returned, they didn't walk. They appeared, not in a flash of light, not with grandeur, but suddenly, unmistakably, where they had once stood weeks ago. Near the edge of the colony, beneath the leaning ridge of slate-gray stone. The snow was familiar, but the air felt thinner, as if the world had exhaled and not yet remembered to inhale again. Larry staggered forward. Greta steadied him. The glow in his eyes had faded, but not entirely. It lingered like starlight reflected in black ice, pulsing faintly with each breath. He didn't speak for several minutes. Neither did Greta. The place that once felt ordinary now felt smaller, heavier, out of step. They found old Snap first. He didn't bite Larry this time. He just looked him over, head tilted. Didn't expect you back. Larry managed a small smile. Neither did I. Snap's gaze narrowed. Something's wrong with your face. It's different. Greta rolled her eyes. He's glowing, Snap. Try not to sound surprised. Snap looked to the sky again. I've been remembering things. Things I shouldn't. An old journal. A shipwreck. A map with teeth. Larry nodded. You're remembering because the feather let you. Snap raised an eyebrow. Feather? Larry extended his flipper. A faint shimmer rippled across his feathers, no object, no artifact. Just him. Greta said, long story. Involves monsters, glowing tunnels, and a city that might have been dreaming for 1,000 years. Snap muttered, figures. Word spread quickly. The colony buzzed with cautious curiosity. Many gathered to see the penguin who'd left as an oddball and returned as something stranger. They didn't understand what had happened, but some instinct deep in their bones told them that something had shifted in the snow and the sky, and that Larry had been at the center of it. But not everyone believed. A younger penguin named Noel, brash and impatient, stood atop a cracked stone and addressed the crowd. "He's just a bird with stories," Noel called out. "What proof is there of anything? He's been gone for weeks, and now he glows. That doesn't make him a guardian. It makes him weird." Larry didn't interrupt. He just stepped forward and closed his eyes. The wind stopped. Every penguin in the rookery froze as the snow around them lifted gently into the air. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just slow enough to be unmistakably unnatural. Then it spun, not in a spiral of chaos, but in the exact shape of the monolith from the windless zone. And then it settled. Larry opened his eyes. "I don't want you to believe me. I want you to remember." For a moment, nothing happened. Then one by one, penguins in the crowd began to blink, as if waking from a long nap. Some gasped. Some wept. A few dropped to their bellies in awe. The memories weren't full. They weren't clear. But they were real. The rookery, so long content in its frostbitten slumber, began to stir. Greta leaned close. "You think this is it? The start of the remembering?" Larry nodded. "It's not just about knowing the past. It's about protecting the future." Snap grumbled behind them. "You make that sound ominous." Larry's gaze turned south. "Because it is." That night, the stars returned. Not all at once. Just a few. But they were different. Brighter. Sharper. Penguins looked up and tilted their heads. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They remembered the sky. And far beneath the ice, where forgotten things stirred, the cloaked figure walked alone through frost-covered halls older than the colony, older than the storms, older than time. It paused at a crumbling wall of black stone, reached out, and touched a mark that had long gone dormant. It lit with a faint glow. Behind the wall, hundreds of eyes flickered open. The figure whispered, "The bearer has returned. The final trial must begin." Chapter 8, The Stone That Whispers the Stars lasted only 3 nights. Then they changed. On the 4th night, a line of them bent downward, not visibly, not like falling. But bent in a way that made the sky look like it was leaning toward the earth. Most penguins slept through it. But Larry didn't sleep much anymore. He stood alone on the southern ridge, watching the night curve unnaturally above him. The feather's essence, still fused into his body, stirred faintly beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. Something was coming. Not from the sky. From below. Greta joined him just before dawn, silent as usual. They didn't need to speak anymore to know what the other was thinking. "You feel it too?" she asked. Larry nodded. "Something's waking up. Something old." Greta scanned the horizon. "Did we cause this?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think we were always meant to be part of it." They stayed until the sun hinted behind the clouds, then returned to the colony. The change had already begun. The ice near the rookery had cracked, not dangerously, but unnaturally. Thin, perfect lines, like etched glass, crisscrossed the ground. The younger penguins played between the cracks, unaware of the meaning. The elders avoided them entirely. Old Snap met them near the feeding stones. His usual scowl was softened by concern. "The ice is singing," he said, matter-of-factly. Greta blinked. "Excuse me?" Snap nodded toward a patch of pale blue snow. "Put your head to the ground. You'll hear it." Larry did. At first, nothing. Then, faint and eerie. A hum. Low. Repetitive. Rhythmic. Like the wind through a hollow shell. But it wasn't coming from the wind. It was coming from beneath the ice. "It started last night," Snap said. "That humming hasn't stopped." Larry stood slowly. "I think it's calling me." Snap grunted. "Wonderful. I'm sure that's fine." Greta frowned. "You think this is the next trial?" Larry looked toward the glacier wall that bordered the southern end of their world. "I think the final test isn't somewhere far. I think it's been under us this whole time." They prepared quietly. No ceremony. No grand farewells. Just Greta, Snap, despite his complaints, and a few brave volunteers who agreed to help investigate the ice hum. Larry led them south, following the growing tremor that now pulsed like a slow drumbeat in the snow. By the third hour, even the others could hear it. They reached a wide, flat shelf of ancient ice. At the center, perfectly still, sat a stone. Not a boulder, not something natural. But a cut slab of deep obsidian. It hummed visibly, each pulse radiating tiny cracks of light that spread and then faded with a rhythm that mimicked breathing. Snap stared at it. "Why is it always stones and feathers with you?" Larry stepped forward. The air changed. His flippers shook. The memory within him rose like a tide. His vision blurred, and suddenly, he knew what the stone was. Not just a relic. A seal. It had held something inside. And now, it was failing. He turned to the others. "Everyone back up." Greta stepped beside him. "What's happening?" The seal was meant to break only if the memory returned. "It's part of the safeguard." Snap muttered, "Great. So we're tripping alarms now." The humming reached a crescendo. The ice cracked in a perfect circle around the stone. With a hiss of ancient air, the slab split down the middle and slid apart. Beneath it, stairs. Not carved by flipper or claw. Not even melted. These were grown. Crystalline and geometric, leading downward into soft blue light. Snap shook his head. "Of course there are stairs." Larry glanced at Greta. "You with me?" "Always." They descended first, followed by Snap and the rest. The air grew warmer. The humming louder. The staircase opened into a vast chamber of ice. But this was no tunnel. This was a hall. Pillars of glowing quartz reached from floor to ceiling. Along the walls were carvings, images of the bird, the feathers, the watchers, and then the darkness. One section showed something monstrous. A shape with no face and too many limbs, swallowing light and leaving only silence behind. Snap squinted at it. "That's not friendly." At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, just like the one beneath the silver tree in the city that dreams. But this one held no ring, no relic. Just a hole. An empty socket. Greta stared. Something's missing. Larry's chest pulsed. Not missing. Waiting. He stepped forward. The mark in his chest, where the final memory had fused, began to glow. The hum increased until it was nearly a scream. The pedestal cracked. A beam of light erupted, not upward, but outward, spreading across the walls in a flash. And the walls moved. The carvings didn't just show the past, they replayed it. The city falling. The feathers scattering. The darkness that followed. Then, a final scene. A creature. No, a being. Cloaked like the one that had followed them. But this one had no eyes. No body. Just a shadow, fused into the ice itself, waiting. The voice returned, this time from everywhere. The guardian remembers. The world is watching. The ground shook. Above them, snow fell through the cracks. The seal had fully broken now. Greta stepped back. What did we just wake up? Larry's eyes didn't leave the wall. We didn't wake it. We freed it. Snap hissed. Is that better? Then came the sound. Not the hum. Not the wind. A knock. Once. Twice. From beneath the chamber. And whatever was knocking, was climbing upward. Chapter 9, What wakes beneath the knock came again, louder this time. No echo. No delay. It wasn't asking to be let in. It was announcing. The chamber of ice vibrated with its rhythm, the crystalline pillars humming discordantly with every thud. Snow flaked from the ceiling. The walls of memory dimmed, as if afraid. Larry took a single step back from the pedestal. It's not just a creature, he whispered. It's a memory that was buried for a reason. Greta narrowed her eyes. So why is it waking up now? Snap muttered behind them, maybe because some bright-eyed flipper boy shoved the ancient feather of prophecy into every glowing hole he could find. Larry didn't respond. The floor beneath the pedestal cracked. And then it opened. The ice didn't shatter, it peeled, like skin coming away from old fruit. From the opening, warm air rushed out, not heat, but pressure. The kind that made ears ring and mind strain, like standing too close to something very large trying to stay invisible. They stepped back as the fog rose. Within the mist, a shape began to form. It was slow. Deliberate. First a head, elongated, smooth, faceless. Then limbs, long, too many, bending in wrong directions. Its body moved like a jellyfish trapped in a cathedral. It was tall. Towering. Its form seemed made of memory itself. Shimmering in and out of shapes, sometimes penguin-like, sometimes nothing at all. Just flickering absence in the shape of something that once mattered. Snap gasped. That's not real. Larry felt the feather inside him tremble. It's forgotten, he said. Something that was removed from the world long ago. Sealed here so no one would remember it. Greta's voice dropped to a hush. Then why can we see it? Because I made the world remember. The creature, if it could be called that, hovered inches above the ground. Where it passed, the frost retreated, the carvings dimmed, and even the ice itself wilted slightly, like light trying to escape a dying mirror. It turned. No eyes. No mouth. But somehow, it looked at Larry. And spoke. Not aloud. Not into his mind. Into his memory. You carry the weight. Larry's chest pulsed again. You unlocked the path. The seal is gone. The story must now end. Greta moved closer to him, flippers raised defensively. And how? The creature shifted. Its form broke apart momentarily, then reassembled as a tower, then a winged beast, then something empty. It never stopped changing. Only one bearer may remain. Larry's knees wobbled. Snap shouted, "What does that mean?" The walls began to shudder. The chamber dimmed. The creature floated higher. A swirl of snow spun upward in a vortex. Greta hissed, "It wants to fight you." Larry shook his head. "It wants to erase me." The feather inside him flared. The creature lunged. Larry ducked just as a sweeping limb passed overhead, carving a trench into the floor. Greta pulled him behind a pillar. "This isn't a test," she snapped. "It's an execution." Larry caught his breath. "Then I have to survive it." The creature moved again, faster this time. It flickered across the space in impossible ways. One moment it was by the ceiling, the next behind them, the next a swirling sphere of black. The chamber was collapsing. Cracks ran up the walls. The carvings shattered. Memory fled. Snap waved a flipper at the others. "We're pulling back. This isn't our fight." The rest of the volunteers retreated through the staircase, but Greta stayed. "I'm not leaving you," she told Larry. "Not when the end is finally here." Larry stood, eyes glowing fully now, the feathers light burning through his chest. "I'm not ending it," he said. "I'm rewriting it." The creature surged again. This time Larry stood his ground. He held out both flippers. The feather burst from his chest in a swirl of light, not as an object, but as a stream of color and sound and memory. It hit the creature head-on. There was no explosion. There was no scream. Just pause. The creature stopped changing. Then began to remember. Its body collapsed inward. Images fluttered through it, shadows of once lost cities, glimpses of warm seas, trees older than time. It had been something once. Something beautiful. Greta whispered, "You're showing it what it was." Larry stepped closer. "We forgot it. So it forgot itself. It became a monster of absence." He pressed the feather light into its chest. "Now it remembers too." The creature shook. Twisted. Then, sighed. Its shape unraveled like paper burning in reverse. Not destroyed, restored. The darkness peeled back, revealing a core of white light. Then the core rose, and shattered like soft glass. Silence. The humming stopped. The chamber grew still. The seal was broken. But so was the thing it had imprisoned. Larry stood alone at the center of the room. Exhausted. Dazed. Changed. Greta rushed to his side. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded weakly. "Yeah. I think it's finally over." Snap called from the stairs. "If the apocalypse is done, maybe we can go home now." Larry laughed. And the laughter echoed up the steps, through the ice, into the sky. Above, in the stars, the bent arc straightened. And across the world, in places that had long gone cold and silent, feathers began to glow once more. They returned to the colony 5 days later. The sun felt warmer. The snow softer. The clouds no longer marched in rigid lines, they drifted, danced, like they were rediscovering themselves. Penguins gathered at the ridge before they ever saw Larry. They could feel him coming. A ripple through the ice. A hum beneath the snow. He didn't walk ahead of the others. He walked with them. Greta at his side. Snap slightly behind, muttering the whole way about twisted tunnels and winged abominations and how no one had offered him a proper meal since the ordeal began. The volunteers who'd gone with them spread word quickly. And the rookery, for the first time in generations, fell into reverent silence. They reached the edge of the colony where the old buoy still stuck out of the ice like a broken tooth. Larry stood beside it. Looked out across the cliffs. Greta nudged him. "You're thinking again." "Always." "What now?" Larry held up his flipper. The feather, no longer separate from him, but part of his being, flared briefly, then vanished beneath his chest again. "We saved a memory," he said. "But memories are fragile. They fade if we don't pass them on." Snap snorted. "So you're suggesting we turn this whole place into a museum?" Larry smiled. "No. I'm saying we share the story." And that's exactly what they did. Each night, around small fires made from scavenged wood and fish oil lamps, Larry spoke. Greta filled in the dry parts with sharp commentary. Snap interrupted regularly with objections that often turned into accidental punchlines. The colony listened, not just to the adventure, but to the meaning behind it. They learned of the feathers scattered across the world. Of the beings that watched from behind memory. Of the cities that dreamed and the void that fed on what was forgotten. And they learned something else. That penguins could matter. Not just in the practical ways, huddling for warmth, diving for food, surviving, but in cosmic ways. In memory. In myth. And as the weeks passed, change spread beyond the colony. Travelers arrived. Not many, and not at first. But some came, birds blown far from their coasts, foxes from the northern glaciers, a seal pup who had followed the stars. They all told the same story: the sky had spoken. Dreams had shifted. And something ancient had whispered a name. Larry. He hated it. Greta loved it. Snap denied ever hearing it. One evening, a young penguin named Sol, barely old enough to swim, approached Larry with wide eyes. "Did you really fight a shadow made of forgetting?" she asked. Larry hesitated. He knelt beside her. "I didn't fight it," he said. "I remembered it." Sol tilted her head. "That doesn't sound heroic." "Maybe not," he said. "But it's what was needed." She paused. "Do you think there are other things like it? Things we've forgotten?" Greta, sitting nearby, looked up from sharpening a stick. "There always are," she muttered. Larry's smile faded slightly. Because Greta was right. Not everything forgotten wanted to be remembered. And not every memory was a gift. 2 nights later, the stars shifted again. No one noticed it at first. Just a tiny black spot where a star should have been. But Larry saw it. Felt it. The absence. He stood quietly on the ridge that evening while the others ate and chattered around the fires. Greta joined him, as usual, without a word. Snap was snoring loudly in a pile of seaweed behind them. Larry stared at the sky. "It's not over," he said. Greta didn't look surprised. "What did we miss?" "Not everything wants to return," he said slowly. "But when memory spreads, it pulls everything back. Good and bad." Greta crossed her flippers. "So we didn't seal a door. We opened it." "Maybe we were supposed to," Larry replied. They stood in silence for a while. Then, far in the distance, past the cliffs and the cold and the fog, a light flickered. Brief. Like a beacon. Then gone. Greta leaned forward. That's not a star. No, Larry said. It's another memory. She sighed. You going after it? He nodded. Not yet. But soon. You'll need help. Always. Snap muttered something in his sleep, something about cursed birds and tunnels that smelled like cabbage. Larry chuckled softly. Greta stared at the empty black patch in the sky. I think the world's bigger than we thought, she said. Larry nodded. I think it's just now remembering what it really is. And so they waited. Not for peace. Not for answers. But for the next flicker. The next ripple in the snow. The next forgotten thing trying to find its way home. And when it came, Larry would be ready. The black spot in the sky didn't grow. It deepened. Each night it lingered where a star once burned, the kind of space that seemed to drain the light around it. Larry checked it often, not because he expected it to change, but because it never did. That constancy, that silent wrongness, made it all the more unsettling. It didn't belong to the sky. It was anchored there, like a forgotten seed waiting for something to trigger its bloom. On the 12th night, the signal came. Not from above, but from deep within the ocean shelf beneath the southern cliffs. A vibration, faint but harmonic, pulsed through the snow. Larry felt it in his flippers before the others heard it. Greta, too, stopped mid-step and narrowed her eyes. That hum again, she muttered. But it wasn't the same as before. This one carried a pitch, a note that wasn't just a sound but a summon, a call from something that had once ruled not over ice or memory, but sky. They called it the skybone. Snap was the one who named it, grudgingly, but with the heavy certainty of someone who knew old stories best when pretending not to believe in them. He recalled fragments of a tale half muttered by a beaked wanderer years ago, of bones from the stars, buried deep under the seabed, bones that weren't made of calcium or dust but of light that had forgotten how to shine. Larry didn't laugh. He believed every word. They assembled a new team. Smaller. Tighter. Greta, of course. Snap, after much dramatic protesting. And a third, a quiet, long-necked penguin named Rua, who had once vanished for an entire season and returned with a talon-shaped scar across her chest and a dislike for speaking more than 4 words at a time. They followed the hum to the cliffs. And then they descended. Greta had mapped the drop herself years ago, a frozen waterfall encased in a hollow channel. At its base, a vast shelf of black ice that led into caves formed by ancient tectonics. They climbed in silence, each step muffled by layers of frost that seemed to muffle sound itself. The cave was alive with sound. Not noise, music. Crystalline tones echoed through the tunnels, faint and high, like wind chimes made of bone. As they went deeper, the air grew dense. The pressure thickened. The tunnels grew less like stone and more like carved memory, smoothed by something too large and too deliberate to be mere nature. Then they found it. The skybone. It wasn't a skeleton, not exactly. It was a structure, rib-like and vast, forming the walls of a chamber so large it made the tunnels above feel like a burrow. Pale arches spanned overhead, luminous in the dark. Beneath their feet, the ground glittered with a fine white dust, ash of something long dissolved, or perhaps shed. Larry approached slowly. There, at the heart of the chamber, stood a spire made of twisted, golden ice. A spiral pattern rose from its base, and at the top, embedded in the peak, was a single shard of iridescent crystal. It thrummed. Greta whispered, "That's no feather." Larry agreed. "It's something older." The shard pulsed brighter. A beam of soft blue light extended from its center, pointing not down, but up, straight through the cave's ceiling, through stone and snow and sky, to the black spot above. Snap groaned. "It's a beacon." Rua finally spoke. "A door." They turned to her. Greta raised an eyebrow. "You know this place?" Rua didn't blink. "I dreamed of it. Before I came back last year." Snap narrowed his eyes. "Came back from where?" But Rua didn't answer. The spire's light changed. It flickered, then formed symbols in the air, runes made of mist and starlight. Larry stepped forward instinctively. The runes recognized him. They rearranged, settling into a spiral formation like the feather's markings had done. Then, a voice. Sharp and distant, as if blown in from the other side of the stars. "The sky is not the limit. It is the first gate." Greta hissed. "Tell me we're not going up there." But Larry's eyes were locked on the black spot in the sky. "I think we're being invited." Snap's feathers bristled. "By what?" Larry didn't answer. The shard inside the spire cracked. A single sliver broke free and floated gently toward Larry, stopping just above his chest. Greta reached for him. Larry, too late. The sliver entered his body with no pain, just a sudden expansion. Of sight. Of sound. Of scale. He saw beyond the world. He saw a great winged skeleton sleeping among broken stars. A prison built from drifting planets. A single feather the size of a mountain, orbiting a sun that had already died. He saw a door made not of matter, but remembrance. And he saw what waited behind it. When Larry collapsed, Greta caught him. He gasped, blinking hard. "We're not done." Rua stepped forward. "You saw it, didn't you?" Larry nodded. "I think, the feathers weren't just memory. They were keys." "To what?" Snap asked. Larry stood slowly. "To the place where the first forgetting happened. The source." And now, the last gate had begun to open. The shard's vision left Larry quieter than usual. He didn't speak as they climbed out of the caves. Even as the winds whipped over the cliffs and snow danced like ash around them, he said nothing. The others didn't press. Whatever he had seen beyond the stars had hollowed something in him, not broken, but carved, like a key finally shaped to fit its lock. By the time they returned to the rookery, the sky had changed again. The black spot above was no longer a spot. It had edges now, faint ridges like the rim of a lid, outlined only when the moonlight hit it just right. Some penguins called it the hole. Others called it the eye. Larry called it a wound that hadn't healed. And now, the wound was listening. It began subtly. Songs. Not melodies, not whistling, but low, resonant tones that came from the ice itself. Just after dusk, the glaciers began to hum in long, slow pulses. The rookery would pause mid-meal, tilting their heads toward the snow. No one knew what it meant. Then, things began to return. Not beings. Not monsters. Artifacts. Frozen in the cliffs, beneath the snowbanks, hidden beneath long dormant nests, objects began to surface. Smooth stones that glowed faintly in the dark. Bones shaped like spindles. Hollow medallions with feather-shaped holes. Objects no penguin had made or lost. They were memories returning home. Old Snap tried to organize them. He failed. Too many penguins were waking with visions. Dreams of winged creatures not yet seen. Echoes of starships above oceans. Symbols they could suddenly draw without knowing how. "It's spreading," Greta said one morning, as the colony gathered around another unearthed relic. "Like a story being told backward." Larry nodded. "And it's almost finished telling itself." A council formed, unofficial, but vital. Penguins who had felt something stir in their bones. Outsiders too, the fox from the frozen coasts, a polar hare with ancient tattoos etched into his ears, a long-lost gull who spoke only in questions. They gathered around Larry. And he told them the truth. He spoke of the feather. Of the forgotten guardian. Of the seal beneath the rookery and the creature that had once lost its name. Of the sky bone. Of the shard. Of the gate. And most importantly, of what still waited behind it. Snap was blunt. "So let me get this straight. There's a cosmic prison buried behind a hole in the sky, and it's cracking open because you remembered too much?" Larry didn't flinch. "It was always going to open. I just got there first." Greta added, "And now we have a choice. Wait and see what comes through, or go through first." A heavy silence followed. Rua stepped forward, quiet as always. "We go." Snap raised a flipper. "You're all insane." But even he didn't leave. Later that night, the glacier sang again. Only this time, it answered back. A different tone. Higher. Brighter. It came from the rookery's northern shelf, where the wind howled most violently. When Larry reached the ridge, he saw it. A column of ice had risen. Not formed by nature. Formed by intention. Perfectly smooth, spiraled like a feather, and glowing with the same light as the shard he'd taken from the skybone. Larry approached. At the top, embedded in the column, was a circular platform made of silver stone. A ring, like a halo, hovered above it, motionless. Greta climbed beside him. "What is it?" Larry touched the stone. It responded. A map burst into the air, not flat, but a hologram of sorts. The sky, drawn from memory and myth. The stars in their old places. The gate in its center. And lines. Lines connecting feathers. Lines converging on a single place. Larry stepped back. The beacon. The ring began to spin. Snap shouted from below. "What did you do?" The sky answered. The black spot peeled open, not like a wound, but like an eye, blooming with spirals of color. The wind stopped. The rookery held its breath. Penguins gathered by the hundreds. No one spoke. And then, from the sky, a beam of pure, silent light shot down from the gate, connecting with the spinning ring atop the column. A second later, the wind returned. And with it, a sound like a chime echoing across an endless sea. The ring stabilized. Larry looked at Greta. "It's not just a gate anymore. It's a path." "To what?" she asked. He looked up, unblinking. "To the truth." The sky rippled. And in the darkness above, something moved. No one slept the night the ring activated. The colony was restless, not from fear, but from an ancient, wordless anticipation. It moved through them like instinct, older than generations, older than speech. Even the chicks, too young to understand what a gate or a feather meant, stared skyward as though they'd been born for this moment. The sky above remained open, its wound now swirling with soft spirals of color, neither terrifying nor beautiful, simply vast, and deeply alive. Larry stood beneath the spiraled column, his flippers folded tightly at his sides, as the ring above turned with quiet precision. Light spilled from its center in perfect lines, forming shapes that faded and reappeared, feathers, orbits, symbols that had once been carved into ice thousands of miles away. Greta stood beside him, her usual sharpness muted by something heavier than skepticism. She had seen too much to doubt now. Rua watched in silence, her eyes reflecting the shifting sky, and Snap, grumbling Snap, sat on a block of cracked snow, muttering to himself as he sharpened a stone against a fish spine. Other creatures had arrived. The fox from the western shore, who had claimed to see the gate's glow reflected in tidal pools. A white owl who spoke rarely but watched everything. A wandering seal with black runes burned into her fur, who claimed to remember things before they happened. None of them argued. They simply joined the circle and waited for what Larry would do. He turned slowly, speaking not with grandeur but with clarity. "This isn't about me," he said, his voice steady. "The feathers weren't meant to crown a hero. They were meant to remind the world that it once knew more than survival. We've forgotten what we are, not just penguins, not just birds or beasts, but pieces of something bigger. Something ancient. Something watching." Snap snorted but didn't interrupt. Greta didn't blink. The ring above gave a low chime, like a bell tolling through deep water. Larry continued, quieter now. "Whatever waits beyond the gate, it remembers us. And we owe it the same." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Greta finally broke it. "So when do we leave?" Larry looked to the column. "Now." The journey to the ring was unlike any they'd made before. They ascended the spiraled ice slowly, each step guided by low pulses of light. The column was wider than it appeared from a distance, almost like a staircase carved from memory itself. The wind rose with them, but never touched them. It howled and circled and whispered around the column's edges, as though respecting its shape, or remembering what it had once been. At the top, the platform waited, hovering a few inches above the spiral's final step. The ring stood perfectly centered above it, humming with quiet purpose. Larry stepped forward, and the ring responded. Light gathered into lines across the stone, forming a shape, for feathers forming a cross, their tips touching. The final symbol at the center was new. A spiral within a spiral. A gate made of thought. The others stood behind him. Greta, calm but alert. Rua, unreadable. Snap, scowling with his flippers crossed. And the rest, strangers, yet not. They had followed the same pulse, the same call. Now they waited for its next beat. Larry raised his flipper. The spiral symbol ignited. There was no flash. No blast of wind. The gate did not open. It turned, folding inward like a curtain pulled back on a stage no one remembered building. The sky peeled like old paint, revealing not darkness, but depth, space not filled with stars but with movement, slow and thoughtful. Shapes drifted in the distance. Some like birds. Others like ruins. Others like nothing that had ever belonged to Earth. One by one, they stepped into the light. Not instantly. Carefully. The air felt thick, not oppressive, but expectant. Like the space beyond had been holding its breath for centuries, and now, at last, the world had spoken its name. Larry was the last to cross. As his flipper touched the edge of the light, he felt everything at once, the feather in his bones humming like a tuning fork, the weight of memory pressing against his chest, the pull of something immense just beyond comprehension. Not evil. Not even hostile. Just ancient. Watching. Waiting. Then he passed through. The gate did not close. Behind them, the column continued to hum, its light tethered to the sky above. The spiral remained, spinning slowly, as if to say, "You may return, but you will not return unchanged." The space beyond the gate had no floor. There was no snow, no ice, no ground to speak of, just a vast, slow-moving current of air and light that seemed to flow in all directions at once. Gravity didn't pull them downward here. Instead, it nudged gently toward a central orbit. The air was breathable, though it didn't feel like air, and there was a hum beneath it all, soft as a heartbeat, deep as the ocean. Larry hovered more than stood. His flippers moved reflexively, but not to balance, just to feel. The feather inside him pulsed steadily, its warmth spreading through his chest like a lantern behind bone. The others drifted beside him, silhouettes suspended in the glowing tide. Greta floated upright, scanning in every direction. Rua spun slowly, arms tucked in, eyes closed as if trying to hear something beneath the silence. Even Snap was quiet, either stunned by awe or too grumpy to speak in zero gravity. Above them, or below, it was hard to say, masses drifted through the colored void. Some were islands made of soft green glass. Others resembled wings, curled and dormant, hundreds of meters wide. The strangest were the shapes of memory themselves. Snippets of places they'd never seen, moments half-felt, a glacier with stairs carved into its heart, a glowing river that ran uphill, a beast made of bells, walking through fog. "What is this place?" Greta finally asked, her voice smaller than usual. Larry turned slowly in the weightless current. "It's the realm of first memory," he said, though he didn't know how he knew it, only that it had been waiting for them to call it by name. A path began to form. It wasn't built, but revealed. Glowing strands of light weaving themselves through the current ahead, forming a loose spiral that extended toward a central point in the distance. That point pulsed like a heartbeat. Not bright. Not ominous. Just steady. Living. Rua pointed silently and began to glide forward. The others followed without question. There was no friction. No resistance. Only motion. The feather in Larry's chest tugged him forward, but also inward. He began to remember things he hadn't experienced. A sky with 3 suns. A language made entirely of color. A lullaby sung by a creature the size of a mountain. They floated for what could have been minutes, or a lifetime. Time didn't move the same way here. When they finally reached the center, the path flared brighter and solidified beneath them. Gravity returned. Their feet found purchase on a broad platform made of translucent stone. In the middle stood an obelisk, black, angular, and humming with deep resonance. Symbols danced along its surface, changing shape as they watched. Runes from the feather. Curves from the silver tree. Diagrams from the spiral ship. All converging now in one place. Snap finally broke the silence. "Please tell me this isn't another door." Larry stepped toward the obelisk. "Not a door," he said softly. "A mirror." He reached out and placed his flipper on the stone. Light leapt from the surface, forming a circle above the platform. Within the circle, images appeared. Flickering, shifting. The history of forgetting. They watched as worlds were born, bright and full of thought. They saw great beings, not gods, not creatures, watchers, drifting through space like birds in a sky of stars. The watchers began recording memory, collecting thoughts, dreams, and experiences from every living thing. But they didn't store these memories. They wove them into reality itself, binding the past and present so tightly that time was never lost. Until the silence came. A void emerged, not a creature, but a rupture in the fabric of remembering. It swallowed meaning, turning truth into fog. The watchers were the first to fall. One by one, they unraveled, forgotten by the very world they had created. But a few scattered fragments, feathers, were sent to planets, embedded in glaciers, stone, sea. Seeds of resistance. Keys to remembering. Greta whispered, and we found them. Larry stared into the light. We became them. The vision dimmed. The obelisk pulsed again and changed. A symbol appeared, a spiral with two branching wings. Rua stepped forward. That's the source. Larry nodded. It's the first watcher. The one who left the feathers. The one who hid itself inside memory, waiting to be restored. Snap scowled. So now we're supposed to wake a forgotten god? Greta shrugged. It'd be the fifth strangest thing we've done this week. The light ahead opened once more. This time not as a path, but as a corridor, straight and narrow, leading into what looked like the underside of a giant shell. Faint golden lights flickered within. A heartbeat rhythm began pulsing under their feet, louder now, guiding them onward. Larry hesitated only a moment. Then stepped inside. The corridor wasn't long, but it felt endless. Its walls shimmered like a river of glass beneath moonlight, translucent but never revealing what lay beyond. Golden light pulsed beneath their feet, timed perfectly to the rhythm of something alive, breathing, watching, waiting. The silence deepened the farther they went, not from absence of sound, but from the stillness of a place that had not moved in millennia. Larry walked first, his steps slow and deliberate, the feather in his chest pulsing in sync with the heartbeat below. Behind him, Greta moved with quiet readiness, her eyes scanning every surface as if she half expected the corridor to close around them. Rua followed in near silence, her movements fluid, almost reverent. Snap brought up the rear, grumbling quietly to himself but never once turning back. When the corridor finally ended, it did so without fanfare. The walls simply fell away, and they stepped into a vast, spherical chamber suspended in absolute stillness. No sky. No ground. Just a hollow sphere of amber light with a single presence at its core. The first watcher. It floated at the center, an enormous being shaped like a spiral starburst, feathers of golden mist and radiant memory cascading from its core in slow, unending motion. It had no face, no voice, no form in any way recognizable, yet its presence was undeniable. It radiated age, wisdom, sorrow. It pulsed with memory, not in words or visions, but weight. Larry fell to his knees without realizing it. The others stopped behind him, struck silent. Greta took a half-step forward, then froze as the watcher moved, or seemed to. Its shape shifted like light through water, drifting gently in the airless chamber, folding and unfurling in waves. The chamber responded. Rings of glowing glyphs formed around them, cycling slowly. Runes from every world, every language, every lost culture. Then came the voice, not spoken aloud, not in their minds, but through memory itself. Each of them felt it differently. Larry heard it as wind across old paper, Greta as a call from across the tundra, Snap as the creak of rotting wood beneath heavy snow, and Rua, as a long-forgotten lullaby. You are late. Larry stood, eyes locked on the watcher's form. We came as soon as we could. The forgetting was meant to be delayed. Not broken. Not yet. Greta frowned. You wanted the world to forget. To protect it. until it was ready to remember all of it. Larry stepped forward slowly, flippers lowered. Then why scatter the feathers? Why leave a trail at all? The watcher pulsed again. The feathers around it darkened briefly, revealing glimpses of a memory long buried. I was not the only one. A new shape flickered into view behind the watcher, similar in design but darker, smaller, broken. Its feathers were not mist but jagged shards. Its center was not golden, but hollow. A second watcher. My sibling tore away from the memory. It believed forgetting was not a wound, but a gift. It fed on loss, on silence, on the collapse of meaning. I sealed it behind the first gate, then scattered what remained of myself across time. Rua tilted her head. But it followed us. Through the cracks. Larry's breath caught in his throat. That black star in the sky, it is not a star. It is its eye. The glyphs circling the chamber shifted suddenly, turning red. The heartbeat beneath their feet grew louder, faster. The watcher dimmed briefly, as though startled. Outside, the light of the corridor flickered. Greta whispered, "It knows we're here." Snap stepped back toward the corridor. "I'd say we leave now." But the watcher did not move. Instead, it released a single object from its core, small, simple, and ancient, a feather unlike the others. This one was forged of obsidian, etched with cracks, glowing faintly with the same spiral symbol Larry had seen in the skybound spire. The binding feather. The last memory. If placed where the silence lives, it can lock the gate once more. Larry stepped forward, taking the feather into his flippers. It was cold. Not with temperature, but with absence. But be warned. It can only be used once. And if the silence takes you before it's cast, all that you are will be unmade. Rua turned to Larry, her voice calm. You have to decide soon. Behind them, the corridor pulsed red. A shadow was moving through the spiral path they'd traveled. Not walking. Flooding. Its shape was formless, but its presence filled the air like a collapsing lung. The temperature dropped, but not just in the body, in the mind. Words faded. Memories thinned. Greta clutched her head, her gaze dulling for just a moment before snapping back. Snap shouted, "It's eating our thoughts." Larry didn't hesitate. He turned to the watcher. Is there a faster way out? No path remains but forward. The chamber around them opened. A tunnel of golden light stretched across nothingness, leading away from the core. The watcher turned once more, and then, without sound, collapsed. Its body unraveled into millions of threads, each curling outward into the stars, drifting away like leaves on the tide. Only the binding feather remained, now glowing brighter. The silence entered the chamber. Larry turned. The shadow now had shape. A void shaped like a penguin, but taller, wrong, flickering at the edges like it had forgotten how to be a body. Its head tilted toward them. And it smiled. The chamber tore itself open. Not violently. Not with destruction. But with purpose, like a memory recalled too quickly. Golden plates of the chamber peeled back one by one, revealing a tunnel not of stone or light, but of remembrance. The path ahead shimmered with motion, fragments of history coiled in threads that twisted through the air like roots made of moments. And behind them, the silence moved. It didn't walk. It erased. Each step it took unmade the ground it touched. Runes faded from the walls. Symbols vanished mid-flicker. Even light recoiled, as if fearing that simply illuminating it might cost something irretrievable. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. Larry gripped the binding feather in his flipper as though it were his heartbeat. It pulsed colder with every breath, sensing its opposite draw near. He turned to the others. Run. They didn't ask questions. Greta led first, leaping into the tunnel with no hesitation, her stride sure despite the path's shimmer. Rua followed close behind, silent and fluid. Snap paused only long enough to grumble, "If I get erased, I swear I'm haunting someone." Then he threw himself into the glowing corridor. Larry ran last, the feather tucked against his chest. The tunnel was strange, it moved with them. Not like a bridge, but like an organism responding to urgency. As they sprinted, the walls flashed with fragments of memory, moments from their lives, yes, but also from lives they'd never lived. A mother penguin defending her chick during the first deep freeze. A feather drifting from the wing of a creature that had no name. A conversation between stars. A war fought in dreams. Time bent around them. The tunnel narrowed, then widened again. At one point, it rose steeply, and they found themselves climbing across a staircase that hadn't existed a second earlier. Beneath their feet, space itself. Not stars. Not galaxies. Just a blank canvas, waiting to be painted again, or erased entirely. The silence followed. And it began to whisper. The sound wasn't like any voice they knew. It wasn't even sound, really. It was the sensation of a thought dissolving. Greta stumbled mid-step, shaking her head. "It's taking words," she gasped. "I knew a word, it was for something cold. I don't remember." Rua stopped just long enough to press a flipper against Greta's shoulder. Her eyes burned with clarity. "Keep your will fixed. Do not give it space inside you." Snap bared his beak. "It's digging around in my head. I swear it found the song my cousin used to hum and just ripped it out." Behind them, the void grew. It wasn't close, not yet, but every turn they took, every thought it pulled, it grew heavier. The binding feather burned in Larry's grasp, and for a moment, he heard a voice, not the Watcher's. His own. But not from now. From a future he hadn't lived yet. Don't let it reach the spiral gate. If it breaks through there, all memory dies. The tunnel curved suddenly. A sharp left through what appeared to be a crumbling library made of snow. Pages drifted in midair, paper with glowing script, but as the silence entered behind them, each page burst into dust. Greta swerved around a falling beam of light that cracked under its own metaphor. Rua kicked off a spiraling symbol, using it like a platform to leap ahead. Snap threw a snowball behind him, more instinct than logic, but when it hit the silence, it simply ceased, vanishing like it had never been. Larry lagged a half-second behind. The weight of the feather dragged on his thoughts. It didn't want to be carried anymore. It wanted to be used. They reached the next threshold. A door. No frame, no wall, just an outline of memory forming a circular gate at the tunnel's end. It pulsed with runes, each one flickering faster as the silence drew near. Greta reached it first and turned. What's beyond? Rua was already there, reading the symbols with narrowed eyes. It leads to the spiral gate. The one tethered to the core of remembrance. Snap stumbled through, panting. Does it come with snacks? Greta grabbed Larry's flipper, yanked him forward. He crossed the threshold. And the moment they all passed through, the door closed, not with a sound, but with a seal. The silence struck the edge an instant later, and for a fraction of a second, it collided with resistance. The tunnel flickered. The door pulsed. And the silence smiled again. Not defeated. Just delayed. They collapsed on the far side. The spiral gate stood before them, unmistakable. It towered in the center of a suspended chamber, made of interwoven beams of thought and color, swirling together like liquid architecture. Its spokes turned slowly, each one trailing an arc of living light across the chamber's edge. At the center of the spiral, a lock. A socket. Shaped exactly like the binding feather. Rua approached cautiously. "We're here." Larry stood on shaking legs. "But so is it. It's not going to stop." Greta turned to him. "Then do it." He stepped to the spiral gate, lifted the feather, and hesitated. It pulsed violently in his grasp. A question entered his thoughts. If you seal this gate, memory will become fixed. Nothing new. Nothing lost. History will harden. Are you sure? Larry looked back at the others. Rua met his gaze with quiet resolve. Snap stared at the spiral like it owed him a better explanation. Greta just nodded. And that was enough. Larry placed the binding feather into the spiral's heart. The moment Larry placed the binding feather into the heart of the spiral gate, the entire chamber shifted. Not with thunder or flame. Not with triumph. But with gravity. Not the kind that pulled bodies down, but the kind that bent time, memory, and even self toward a single, undeniable point. The spiral gate began to turn. Its spokes accelerated, each one casting arcs of light across the chamber walls, painting symbols that pulsed with heat and meaning. The center where the feather rested deepened into a vortex of spinning thought, echoes from every memory ever lived now caught in its orbit. The gate wasn't just sealing. It was weaving, drawing all fractured recollections into a unified thread. But it wasn't fast enough. From the corridor behind them came a sound unlike anything they had heard. Not a whisper. Not a footfall. A shear. As if a giant blade had sliced through fabric that held reality together. The closed passage glowed red, then purple, then turned to void. And from it, the silence poured in. This time it had no shape to mock. It didn't need to. It had grown stronger with each unspoken word, each vanished story, each forgotten truth. It moved not like smoke or shadow, but like emptiness made aware. It peeled memory from the chamber walls as it moved, stripping symbols from the spiral gate's outer arms, even as they fought to reform. Snap cursed. "Oh, come on." Greta stepped forward, ready to intercept, but Rua caught her with a wing. "No weapon stops what isn't here." Greta hissed, "We can't just watch it eat the gate." Rua stared ahead, her voice hushed. "Then we give it something to swallow it can't erase." The silence rose higher, taller now, its edges swirling like oil over frost. It reached toward the spiral gate, but halted when Larry raised his flippers again. The feather burned in the heart of the spiral, but its light flickered now, struggling to stabilize. A voice, not the watcher, not the silence, Larry's own, rang out across the chamber. "You've spent eternity unmaking what matters. But I've carried all of it, what I remembered, what I loved, what I feared. I'm not your enemy. I'm your opposite." The silence surged forward. And Larry ran toward it. Greta called after him, but didn't chase. She understood. Snap's voice cracked. "He's going to get erased." "No," Rua said softly. "He's going to anchor it." Larry threw himself into the shadow just before it reached the spiral gate. The feather pulsed wildly. The light from the gate flared like a nova. The silence struck Larry head-on. But it didn't consume him. It entered him. For a breathless moment, Larry floated in a place without color or shape or sound. The silence flooded through him, searching, reaching, unmaking. It clawed at his memories. The rookery, the shipwreck, the spiral, Greta's dry smirk, Snap's constant grumbling, Rua's scar. And it failed. Because Larry did not resist. He simply held the memories. He let the silence see them, not as noise, but as meaning. And it began to falter. The silence hesitated. Trembled. For the first time, its presence fractured, struggling against something it had never encountered. A bearer who welcomed what it could not destroy. The spiral gate reacted instantly. Its central lock sealed with a final click, and a flare of energy erupted outward in a perfect circle. The silence recoiled violently, its edges tearing like paper, its body fragmenting into ribbons of unformed thought. It screamed, not a sound, but the sensation of something that had never known defeat breaking apart. Larry opened his eyes in the void and whispered, "You don't have to vanish. Just rest." The silence exploded. But not into destruction. Into memory. All across the chamber, color returned. Symbols reformed. Light spiraled outward from the gate, reaching far beyond the room, back through the corridor, through the golden tunnels, through the sky gate, all the way back to the frozen world where the rookery sat beneath a sleeping sky. Above the colony, the wound in the stars closed gently. And for the first time in a very, very long time, the world remembered everything. Larry collapsed beside the spiral gate. Greta was there first, pulling him upright. His feathers were singed with light, his eyes unfocused, but he smiled. "You're not glowing," she muttered. "I think I gave it all back." Rua knelt beside them, her voice quiet. "You burned the forgetting with your own story." Snap sniffed and crossed his flippers. "Well, I still don't know what the point of the tunnels full of singing fish was, but, fine. You did okay." Larry laughed softly, the sound echoing like a memory restored. The spiral gate turned once more, slowly now. Sealed. Balanced. And behind it, beyond the barrier of time and forgetting, the silence had been folded back into what it always was, the space between stories, no longer a threat, but part of the cycle. The world would forget again someday. But not yet. Not while Larry remembered. They returned on the third day. The golden corridor from the spiral gate hadn't disappeared, it had grown gentler. Where once it hummed with raw memory and light, it now drifted like a breeze through the fabric of the world, no longer demanding, no longer testing. The gate had sealed, but the path remained. A bridge, not just across place, but across meaning. And for the first time since the journey began, Larry wasn't carrying the weight of memory alone. He walked at the front with Greta and Rua beside him, their silhouettes outlined in quiet starlight. Snap trudged behind, dragging a cracked crystal orb he'd found somewhere in the spiral chamber and refused to part with. "I don't know what it does," he kept muttering. "But it looks mysterious. Probably dangerous. Definitely collectible." When they stepped back through the column of light and into the frozen air above the rookery, the world met them in silence. Not the frightened kind. The reverent kind. The penguins were already gathered. Hundreds of them, standing still beneath a sky unlike any they'd ever known. The stars above had returned, but they had changed. They shimmered now with strange geometries, spirals and feathered arcs, constellations that shifted slightly when one blinked. Not illusions. Not hallucinations. Memories. The sky had become a map. And Larry's return was the key. The crowd parted wordlessly as the four travelers stepped into view. Some bowed without realizing it. Others stared, wide-eyed. A few wept and didn't know why. The very snow beneath their feet had begun to change, thin lines of golden frost wove like vines across the ground, forming runes that faded as they passed over them, as though the earth itself had remembered what it once knew and was trying to say thank you. Larry didn't speak right away. He let the silence breathe. The world had shifted, and the rookery felt it. The change was not loud. Not dramatic. But it was everywhere. No one had forgotten anymore. Names, places, stories, things that had been gone for generations, had crept back into thought like old friends arriving in the dark. Greta finally nudged Larry with her flipper. "You're going to have to say something eventually." Larry took a breath and stepped forward. "The silence is sealed," he said simply. "The thing that unmade stories has been returned to sleep." Murmurs rippled gently through the crowd. "But memory doesn't belong to me," he continued. "It belongs to all of us. Every creature. Every voice. Every quiet moment you thought no one noticed. It all matters now. It always did." An elder penguin, one of the ones who hadn't spoken in years, raised his voice gently from the back. "Will it return someday?" Larry nodded. "It will. Everything forgotten tries to come back eventually. That's why it's not enough to remember. We have to keep sharing." Rua stepped forward and set something on the snow, an echo stone from the spiral gate. It shimmered briefly, then darkened. She looked at Larry, then the colony. "This stone stores a memory when spoken into. A story. A name. A song. You leave a part of yourself behind, and it lives forever." Snap squinted at it. "So basically, a very fancy talking rock." Rua didn't argue. Larry looked around at the gathered faces. "We'll need more of them. And not just here. All across the ice. Across the world. We've forgotten too much. It's time we start building something that can't be unmade." Greta tilted her head. "You just volunteered us for more work, didn't you?" He smiled. "Feels like we're just getting started." That night, for the first time in living memory, the colony sang. Not a song they had known. Not something passed down. A new song, built from the echoes of everything they had seen, woven from journeys, sacrifices, and the silence that tried to steal it all. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was theirs. And it rang into the sky like a promise. Above them, the stars blinked slowly. And one of them, a small one near the spiral-shaped constellation, flared just a little brighter. Then it pulsed. Then it winked. Not at the world. At Larry. He felt it settle quietly inside him. Not a burden. Not even a power. Just an understanding. The spiral gate had closed. But not all gates are made to stay that way forever. And some memories, even when sealed, still listen. The stars stayed steady for 6 days. On the 7th, one moved. Not in the sky, but in the snow. Rua was the first to find it. She'd been walking the cliffs just before dawn, searching for a place quiet enough to speak her story into one of the colony's new memory stones. That's when she saw it, something small and dark peeking out of the snow. At first, it looked like a frozen branch or a bit of scrap caught in the ice. But when she knelt down and brushed the frost away, she knew immediately what it was. A feather. But not one shaped like the ones from the Watcher. It was wrong. Its edges were jagged. Its surface pulsed, not with color, but with an oily, shifting shimmer, like shadow pretending to be light. Most feathers reminded her of wind or sky or thought. This one smelled like ash. Like something buried. She didn't touch it. She ran to get Larry. When Larry saw it, his heart dropped into his stomach. Greta, standing beside him, narrowed her eyes and muttered, "Please tell me this is just a piece of burnt seaweed." Snap stood a few paces back, already pacing. "I don't like it. It looks active." Rua stood completely still, her voice low. "It wasn't here yesterday." Larry didn't speak right away. He stared at the feather, then closed his eyes. Inside, the echo of the spiral gate burned gently, a kind of compass for things that belonged to memory. It remained quiet. Balanced. That meant this feather hadn't come from the spiral gate. It had come from somewhere else. And worse, it was new. He opened his eyes. Someone planted it. Greta looked around the ridge. But who? Rua knelt again. No footprints. No tracks. Nothing disturbed. Snap grumbled, "So we're being haunted by metaphors now." Larry finally stepped forward and picked it up. The moment he did, the feather changed. Not in color. Not in shape. It began to speak. Not aloud. Not into his thoughts. But through memory, just like the silence had, once. Only this time, it didn't erase. It whispered stories he didn't recognize. Names he'd never heard. Places that might have existed, but had no record in the spiral. Each one rang with detail and color, but there was no truth behind them. No foundation. They were lies told with conviction. False memories. Greta saw the change in his face. "Larry?" He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, voice cold and calm. "This feather doesn't belong to the Watcher." Snap raised a brow. "Then who made it?" Larry looked at the horizon. There, on the farthest cliff, barely a silhouette against the wind, stood a shape. Too tall for a penguin. Too thin. It didn't move. It just stood there. Watching. Then it turned, and stepped backward into the air. Gone. No flash. No sound. Only the echo of that feather in Larry's flipper. Greta stepped beside him. "Is it starting again?" "No," Larry said. "It's testing us." Rua's eyes were distant. Not everything forgotten is malicious. But this was made to mimic. It doesn't erase. It rewrites. Snap scowled. "Great. We sealed the silence and now the lies are waking up." Larry didn't let go of the feather. "I don't think this one wants to destroy memory," he said slowly. "I think it wants to replace it. To be believed. Whether it's real or not." Greta exhaled. "So now we fight stories that pretend to be true." "No," Larry said. "We show them what truth really is." That evening, he gathered the colony. He held up the false feather, not to destroy it, but to name it. "This," he said, "isn't ours. It was made to feel like ours. But it's hollow. It doesn't connect. It doesn't remember." He didn't burn it. He didn't bury it. He set it in a new stone, a memory stone sealed not with power, but with story. Then he turned to the crowd. Lies aren't defeated with silence. They're defeated with reminders. That's why we keep telling the truth. Even when it's hard. Even when no one listens. That's why we keep remembering together. And the colony understood. They weren't just keeping memory now. They were guarding it. As the stars wheeled slowly above, Larry looked again toward the cliffs. No shape returned. But deep in the ice, something shifted, curious. And just a little disappointed. By spring, the stars had settled into shapes that no longer shifted with every breath. They still shimmered with memory, and new patterns continued to form on occasion, gentle arcs and spiral bursts, but now they did so like constellations with purpose, not warnings. The sky had become a library, and it no longer whispered in hunger. It hummed with peace. The rookery changed, too. Slowly, then all at once. Memory stones dotted the landscape now, embedded in gentle snowbanks or perched along ridgelines like sentries. They glowed faintly when touched. Some contained old stories. Births, migrations, the first time a penguin learned to dance. Others held more solemn memories, of what had been lost, of what had been sealed, of what might still remain out there, watching. Every penguin was encouraged to contribute. No voice was too small. No tale too trivial. Memory had become an act of community, not a burden or a prize. Larry walked often now, not alone, never that again, but not in parades or ceremony. He strolled quietly, greeting those he passed, pausing at the memory stones to listen. The feather that had once pulsed in his chest had gone silent months ago. Not dead. Not lost. Just, resting. It had become part of him fully, indistinguishable from his own will. He didn't glow anymore, and that was fine. He didn't need to. The world remembered enough now for him to simply be. Greta remained by his side, always half a pace ahead or half a pace behind, depending on her mood. She had become something of a teacher, though she never used the word. She taught younger penguins how to listen to memory, how to question stories without breaking them, how to shape truth like a sculpture rather than trap it in stone. She also, on occasion, used her flipper to bop someone upside the head if they disrespected the ritual of listening. Larry suspected the bops had become something of a tradition in their own right. Rua traveled more than the others. After the sealing of the spiral gate, she had begun tracing older paths, places she claimed had appeared to her in dreams and memories that hadn't quite been hers. She returned every few weeks with knowledge, artifacts, sometimes even visitors, a snow hare who remembered being born beneath 2 moons, a bear who sang in colors, a seabird who claimed to have met the watcher long before feathers fell to earth. Rua never stayed long, but when she did, the rookery sat a little taller, listened a little closer. Snap, of course, became the de facto guardian of the weird things. He maintained a cluttered corner near the edge of the colony full of relics, cracked glowstones, fragments of the spiral map, bits of feathers that still hummed on cold nights. He charged no fee to view them, but insisted on personally telling the story behind each one, whether it was true or not. And no one ever stopped him, because somehow, every version still felt right. One evening, as the sky dimmed into a shade of violet Larry hadn't seen before, he and Greta stood on the ridge overlooking the sea. The waves glowed faintly, not with starlight, but with echoes. Every so often, the tide whispered back memories the rookery had sung into the ice months earlier, little pieces of song and story skipping across the surface like stones. Greta spoke first, her voice quieter than usual. "Do you ever wonder what's still out there?" Larry nodded, but not with fear. "I used to. I don't anymore." "Why not?" "Because I know it will find us when it's ready. And when it does, we'll know what to do." She was silent for a moment. I think that scares me more than the silence did. That's how you know it matters, he replied. They stood without speaking for a while longer. Beneath them, young penguins gathered around a newly carved memory stone, each adding a short story of their day. Not epic tales. Just moments. A joke told badly. A fish caught cleverly. A game played in the slush. And above them, the stars held steady. Larry turned to Greta and smiled. Do you think they'll keep it going? Even when we're gone? Greta looked down at the penguins, at the stones, at the sky. I don't think they'll know how not to. Far away, beyond the ice and tide, something stirred, a ripple in space, soft as breath, familiar as dusk. Not a threat. Not a return. Just the world rolling forward. The silence did not rise. The gate did not crack. But the story continued, as stories always do. Not with a shout. But with a shared word, a warm memory, and the quiet promise of never forgetting again.